40% Merlot, 40%
Oh,
Malbec,
it's
and 20%
tastes
Absinthe.
tastes good for you.
Welcome to the Wine Enthusiast Podcast, the world in your glass.
Wine Enthusiast Catalog is the ultimate destination for all your wine storage and wine accessory needs. From luxury wine cabinets to the finest stemware, we've got you covered. Visit us at wineenthusiast.com to browse the latest trends in wine gadgets and wine decor. That's Wine Enthusiast Catalog at wineenthusiast.com, where we've got everything but the wine.
My name is Sean Sullivan. I'm a contributing editor to Wine Enthusiast magazine. Today I wanted to talk about Washington State wine. I think, Washington is interesting because it's a very young and emerging wine growing region. So most wineries here, Chateau Ste. Michelle, the largest wine company in the state looking across all of its brands, was founded 50 years ago this year. And that's pretty much as far back as the wine industry goes. And particularly Alan Shoup, because Alan Shoup is the founder of Long Shadows Vintners, a winery in the Walla Walla Valley, and was originally the CEO for a company called Stimson Lane, which is the parent company for Chateau Ste. Michelle. So he worked there for, I believe it was 17 years. And as I said, Ste. Michelle is really the dominant player in the Washington wine industry. If you look at across their various wineries that they own, they are involved in well over probably half of the overall acreage in the state, as well as wine production in the state. So Alan was responsible in the kind of early days of really shepherding that company to where it is today. Alan, thank you very much for being here with us today.
My pleasure, Sean.
Yeah, so this was 1980. You first came to the Chateau, if I'm correct, right? And then
Exactly.
became CEO a few years later. Obviously, very different times in the Washington wine industry. Hardly any grape acreage in the ground. Give us a sense of what the Washington wine industry kind of looked like at that point in time.
It was very difficult, much more difficult than most people can imagine, because starting a wine business in an unknown viticultural region is difficult enough. But what we had early on, we had a huge freeze in '79 that virtually wiped out the entire industry. We had to replant 2,000 acres. After about 4 years, we began to have freeze after freeze. Never would one freeze, except that one, kill more than 50% of the vine. But we lost enough every year that we began to financially budget in our 10-year plan that we would have to assume 4 years of harvest for a 5-year period. We'd lose at least a harvest every 5 years, a full harvest. And then we started fighting different diseases that we didn't know about, all these different scares that we had, and we spent a lot of money with research. So that was the hard part. And then, of course, just going around the country and trying to convince distributors.
So Ste. Michelle was very much involved with the establishment of the Columbia Valley as a growing region, Washington's largest federally approved growing region. Tell me a bit about what that process was like and what the goals were.
It was extremely self-evident to me that Washington had a real problem just with the name.
Yeah.
And it was very hard to convince people, because people here, they live here, and they're egocentric about Washington, and they just feel like, hey, we all know it. What do you mean? And they don't realize that 99.999% of the people in the world know the word Washington, and it means something 3,000 miles from here, even national news. So, secondly, all the great wine regions were viticulture regions. So I knew we needed a viticulture boundary, and I asked Wade Wolf, who had a PhD and worked for me, to come up with a design for a viticulture region. And it was very important to me that it be all-inclusive, because I felt if it wasn't all-inclusive, that the average, we know psychologically, the average person who doesn't work in a business, but he has a list of about 3 things. If you ask them, how many people make tractors, how many people make steel or something, they usually can come up with 3. Very difficult to go beyond that unless you're actually in the industry. So I knew that very unlikely we would ever break into the 3, but certainly we got to be somewhere on the list. As close as possible, a goal would have been that name the 3 most important American viticulture regions: Napa, Sonoma, Columbia Valley. That would have been the kind of goal. You can't make up a name for a viticulture, and it can't be fictitious. It has to have historical precedence.
So you have to go through the TTB. You have to send in an application that basically states the borders of the viticulture region. You need to see why it's distinct as a wine growing region from other areas, and give some kind of name proof to what the growing region is.
So they did two things. One is they went and made a viticulture region that basically would comprise everything that they thought possibly could someday grow grapes. And then a lot clearer is a well-known map, the map by Lewis and Clark. When they came through Washington, they sent a map back to Thomas Jefferson, and it showed the Columbia Valley. So that made it pretty easy to use the Columbia Valley.
So for people who may be unfamiliar with Washington wine, what do you think really defines the state and its wines?
I think it's difficult because I think we're still evolving. Because if you look at what I have seen from 1980 to now, I mean, it's night and day. And we still haven't mastered site selection. We haven't mastered what clones to put in what sites. It's also exciting that we probably, as an age of winemakers, and winemakers are much younger than anywhere else, and so we have all this young, creative talent that isn't steeped in tradition and is willing to experiment. If you just force to say what's the difference and do it in a generality, most people would say we're not as masculine as California, let's say Napa, and we're not as feminine as Bordeaux, and that we're somewhere in between. And I guess that's not a bad place to live, although obviously we have many examples which would exceed both sides of those.
One of the characteristics of Washington is that a single grape variety doesn't really define the state. We grow a lot of things well here. Do you look at that as a help or a hindrance to Washington wine kind of making its way onto the world map?
I think it's a help because it keeps us creative and exploring, and there's just so many grapes that we're discovering that we can do well with, and it's way too early for us to define it. I just think it's kind of a luxury right now that we have, and certainly we wouldn't grow as fast. If we'd be like Oregon if we were dependent on, as they were for so long, one grape. That's a lot of eggs in one basket, and Oregon has never been really able to explode except for that. The volume of the wine that is produced in Oregon is a fraction of what we produce.
Do you think Washington will ever be known for a single grape variety?
I think more likely Washington will be like California, in which you'll have the Russian River known for Pinot Noir, Napa Valley known for Cabernet, that kind of breakup of different viticultural areas. So, as example, I bought wineries in Napa while I was running Saint Michel, and anybody who didn't plant their grapes at Cabernet was losing money. We bought a Chenin Blanc, 40 acres of Chenin Blanc from a very famous producer right by Plum Creek Winery right there on Silverado Trail. He just loved Chenin Blanc, and we made a world-class. We bought it and made a world-class Chenin Blanc. We couldn't pay him anything for the grape, and we couldn't sell it. So that's the reality. Yeah. Certainly, some places are going to grow Chenin Blanc, and they're going to rediscover them, and they're going to be phenomenal. But as I say, we're young. We haven't even found what clone of grape to put on the soil, much less deciding which regions of Napa. And we kind of, I think, have given Red Mountain to Cabernet,
sure,
as it deserves. But that's about as close as well. And we give the rocks where the few that we have.
Yep.
We give
Syrah.
that to Syrah.
Yeah. So it'll definitely take a lot of time to sort of sort that out. Yeah. You talked about how no one really kind of saw what Washington would become back in those early days. When did you first start to really realize that there was something kind of special to the Washington wine industry?
It's interesting you asked that question because it was relatively early on. As we were going through the library of wines, we pulled out a 75 and 76 Cabernet, Saint Michel Cabernet. And we opened them. This had been, 84 or 85, and they were ambrosia. I mean, and we put them in blind tastings, and they'd compete with first growths. They were just beautiful. How that happened, none of us know, because we didn't have, those were not, made under
young vines.
Well, and not made with the kind of technology that we were using now and the kind of equipment or anything else. But there they were, and that's what convinced some of us that we're going to, and it took us a while to learn how to do that. But now, many examples of those kinds of wines. So that's when I became comfortable. And I gave a speech early on saying, because we were a white wine industry, they would concede that. You could grow Riesling in Washington. It was kind of our cross to bear, kind of a backhanded compliment in a way, since nobody bought Riesling. And so I gave a speech and said that eventually Washington would be known more for its reds than its white. And I was laughed at a bit. But I know Mike Holg always remembers it and reminds me about it, that I had said that, and that's the case. And it was just because of those two vintages of a single wine. Yeah.
Yeah, and now it's kind of, I think, although Riesling still plays a big role and white wines do in general, Washington is very much considered a red wine state. That's
exactly. Even though Saint Michel probably produces more Riesling than all the other wineries in America combined.
Yeah. Yeah, over 1 million cases of their Columbia Valley Riesling alone. So Robert Mondavi is really considered by many probably the father of the Napa Valley wine industry, like a true icon who came to the valley very early and established one of the most prominent and well-known wineries in California, and was probably more than any individual responsible for really kind of spreading the gospel of Napa Valley wine, which is the most dominant wine region in the United States at this point, and was really one of your mentors. Talk a little bit about that relationship and what you kind of learned from him.
Bob and I just, for some reason, got along very, very well, and he called me his soulmate. We just shared the same views on all these issues and didn't know it until we were in various kinds of forums where we'd be reinforcing one another's comments. But I think the two most important men in the American wine industry unequivocally are Ernest Gallo and Bob Mondavi. Ernest Gallo brought wine to the masses in a way that couldn't otherwise have been done, and Bob Mondavi instilled this desire to make world-class wines and brought the PR tools to get that story out. The most brilliant thing in my mind done in marketing PR in the wine industry was the joint venture between the Baron Rothschild and Bob Mondavi. If you think of what that did, it brought the impetus of one of the world's greatest known wines, highest, first growth, into California, into Napa. Certainly Mondavi got a lot of credit, but he promoted everybody, and that was always his vision, was to promote everybody, just like it was mine. That's why seeing that was the model of I knew we had to do something similar to that in Washington. I worked for a long time to make that happen.
So Chateau Ste. Michelle has always had a big focus on relationships. It's somewhat the seal of approval of a classic wine region like Bordeaux to have someone from that region come to there and say they want to grow wine grapes and make wines there is essentially giving their seal of approval on that particular wine region. And so with these partnerships, specifically there's three that Chateau Ste. Michelle has. There's one, the first one in 1995 with Col Solari with the Antinori family from Italy, and the second one from Ernst Lozen with Germany, and then a third one, a Rhone partnership. They're essentially saying, taking particular styles of grapes or styles of wines and making those varieties in conjunction or in partnership with these international winemakers is essentially giving them kind of a seal of approval in some way. So talk a little bit about those partnerships and what you think they've done for the Washington wine industry.
I don't think we had the impact with these partnerships that Bob had with the Baron Rothschild, partly because the Baron Rothschild was also very PR-oriented. And so you had these two giants kind of promoting. We don't have a Bob Mondavi here, nor do we have a joint venture with anybody as big picture as the Baron Rothschild. But Piero Antinori and I got to know each other, and he came a couple times, and I got the idea, let's see if he'll do it. And I said, so I asked Piero, and he said, well, I'll bring Renzo Cottarella, we'll look at it. And came a few weeks later. He was there at the time. He came within a month. They went over. We had 50,000 barrels of red wine, so they certainly could, see what we're doing. He came back to my office at the end of the week, and he says, well, why not? Let's do this. And I said, well, how do you want to get started? Your lawyers, our lawyers. I've got this document that it's about 2 inches thick that we worked on with Pachan Milan. It's every contingency in the world. Well, let me take that and we'll look at it. So Piero calls me back and says that he's looked over the document and he says it's a pretty good document, but I think it has 3 mistakes. And I shuddered, thinking, "Oh no, I can't go through this again." And he says, "But I don't think you will mind. They are all for you." And he found 3 things that he thought we were being too generous with.
Interesting.
And I always thought, that's the way I'll start partnerships. What could be better than that?
So St. Michel, kind of the first chapter, and then I guess you left St. Michel in 2000, if I recall correctly.
2000, yeah.
Yeah, and then 2002 you started Long Shadows Vintners. Talk to us a little bit about the idea behind starting that winery.
My dream as a child was to own my own business, and I always had that frustration. Running St. Michel was as close as you can get because nobody in the parent company ever gave me instructions. I reported to them through budget. They would sometimes not give me as much money as I wanted, but never did they tell me how to make the wine. They supported me on anything we wanted to build or plant. I mean, it was very, very supportive. So in many ways, it was like running my own company. But in case it wasn't mine, and I used to think when I was putting these ventures together that somebody should do that and bring some of the world's greatest winemakers to Washington and let them only make one wine, but that wine would be one of the specialty of the grapes that they specialize in. And so I decided to do that. And I basically used the same motto, which is I gave each of these people, and by this time I had gotten to know all these people, and I gave each of them 25% interest in the equity of their brand. And I have since bought all those equities out, and Jill makes now Saji.
So Jill Nicole,
Jill Nicole, our super winemaker. Of course, always made Chester Kidder, and he makes now Saji. That was because those partners, the father got too old and the son was too rich. He just couldn't afford to take the time to do it. And when I offered to buy the equity out, he didn't even want me to pay him, but I still gave him a nice check of money.
So you've brought some wines from Long Shadows with us here today. Kind of walk us through some of these wines. So the first one, it looks like this is the 2004 Pirouette, which I believe is the first vintage of this wine, if I'm correct.
When I had the vision to put this deal to get this business together, I knew I had to get some really well-known winemakers to make this work. So quickly I got Michel Rolland. I had developed a very close relationship with him before he was known. I visited him in Bordeaux. I brought him over to be a consultant, and he agreed to the deal. He was also working with Augustin Hinaeus at Quintessa, and so he had bonded with him. And then Augustin, for Pirouette, the wine we're first tasting, came to me at one point when I had John Duvall from Penfold, who made Penfold's Grange, and Randy Dunn to make our Cabernet, and he came to me and said, "I owe you a winemaker. All these other people, without exception, are winemakers. I owe you a winemaker. I'm going to give half of my interest to Philippe Milka, if you don't mind." I had somehow, Philippe Milka's reputation had escaped me, so I didn't really know who he was, but I trusted, and then found out his credentials, being at Petrus and Haut-Brion and everything, and so that was pure luck that I got him, because he didn't know me and I didn't know him. But he came along, and so he's obviously the architect of Pirouette and still does the blending.
So a Bordeaux style blend on this.
Very Bordeaux. That's what we're looking for, a Bordeaux wine.
So one of the things I'm really struck by on this wine, again, this is the 2004 Pirouette from Long Shadows Vintners, is that it's, this is a 12, almost 13-year-old wine, and still an incredible freshness and vibrancy to the, lovely black fruit flavors. If I were blind tasting this wine, I don't think I would ever imagine that this wine is over a decade old. How, obviously, one of the hallmarks of a great wine region is the ageability of its wines, and how do you see Washington wines aging?
Well, I think there was a period there, probably right up into 2000, where we had a fear. And it was a standard thing. If you look at the reviews that we got from everyone, and they would say when to drink, we were usually given a 10-year window of drinkability. And we were afraid. And I didn't think that many of us were making good enough wines, just the way we made wines. We changed our practices so dramatically during the 90s that the way we were making red wines specifically. And I had a tasting just recently with one of your competitors, and I thought I had 2 bottles of was 76. I found of the 56 Cabernet that I talked about, and I wasn't sure. He tasted through all the wines, made the same observation on how young all these different wines. And I went through all, not just Saint Michel wines, but all the wines, and finding how well they were aging. And when he got to that wine, he says, clearly the best wine of the group, and that was 75. So I'm now totally convinced that Washington wines will age with the best of them.
Yeah, one of the things that's the most exciting to me about Washington wine is that it is very early days here, where you look at a winery like Saint Michel just celebrating its 50th anniversary. This year, most vines in the state are considerably younger than that, but the quality of the wines that are being produced is astronomically high, even though, as you say, there's a lot of like site selection and clonal work that has yet to be done in the state. Tell us about this second wine you brought here. Do you want to go to the Chester Kidder?
Yeah, let's try the Chester Kidder. I'm not a winemaker, but I wanted to have my own wine, so this is my mother's maiden name and my grandmother's maiden name, and I was going to kind of design it myself. So what I did is that when everybody started raving about Gilles so quickly, I said, I got to give him a wine. So this is Gilles' wine. Gilles made this wine, and even though it carries my family name, it's Gilles, and he decided early on that he loved the Syrah here and that he wanted to make we call it a New World Bordeaux, a New World Bordeaux being the addition of Syrah. And again, neither he nor I had a reputation as winemakers or anything. This one took a long time, and now it's got almost a cult following, and it's very exciting.
Yeah, certainly I think one of the things you see in Washington compared to other regions of the world is a lot of people using Syrah in Bordeaux-style blends or blending Syrah in Cabernets. And I think, on this wine here, we see a lovely marriage of these two varieties. You get that nice kind of black cherry note of the Cabernet with a really nice soft plushness of the Syrah. Delightful wine. And the third wine you brought from us, you want to open that one up, and this is the Long Shadows sequel. So as we're opening this bottle here, talk a little bit about some of the things you've kind of learned at Long Shadows at this point, I guess celebrating its 15th year this year, which is kind of remarkable, but talk about some of the things that you've learned through this project.
It's reinforced the importance of extreme dedication to quality, that the quality starts in the vineyard, that I believe still in Washington today, it's probably the vineyard manager is probably more important than the site. I just think that we have examples of great vineyard managers on very average sites growing phenomenal grapes, and we have vineyard managers on great sites growing non-phenomenal. So, that's really been reinforced that we need to keep putting more and more time and attention. And that was a huge problem in the beginning because all the farmers didn't drink wine and weren't grape growers. They were just diversified farmers. They put in grapes as a way of diversification. Now most of them, drink wine, and the ones that have survived well have passions for wine and passions for growing grapes. But you can name them. I mean, you yourself would know, and it wouldn't be that big a list.
Yeah.
The other thing is the importance of cleanliness, the importance of space in a winery, the importance of technology. I mean, we just bought a new distimmer that it's just amazing what it can do, and very expensive piece of equipment. But I think all this new technology, I mean, Randy Dunn gets a little upset with it. Randy's the one that when the grapes are sorted and we're pulling out all the stems and everything and just letting the berries go, the stems go on the ground. He'll pick the stems back up and throw it on the conveyor belt because he wants them.
Wants the stems in there. Right. Yeah, doesn't want the clean fruit that.
No, he wants. He and Michel Rohan got a discussion once, and Michel tastes the wine. He says, "I think it's too rustic," and Randy says, "What do you mean? I think it's rustic, but I think it's wonderful."
So tell us about the sequel project. So this is the 2005 Long Shadows sequel.
This was an interesting project because John Duvall, who had been with Penfold Grange for many years and Penfold, the wine company, of many years, and made Penfold Grange for many years, had retired same time I did, same year I believe, and decided to start his own winery. And so I went to him. I had met him, but didn't really know him, but when I talked to him about the project, he got very excited. And so he came over, and he, like every other winemaker, said without exception, we're not trying to make the wine that we make at our own vineyards. We're not trying to make. Randy clearly has not made a Howell Mountain Cabernet. His Cabernet here is so soft, it's almost the antithesis. And they all say that, and he made it clear that he's not trying to make, another Penfold Grange. He's just trying to make a really highly balanced wine in the spirit of Penfold Grange. But he won't make one of these big, robust wines that we're known for. So he's quite a purist, and he takes longer to blend. He doesn't want to be interrupted when he's blending. He's just focused. He takes 2 days. Michel Ron takes 2 hours, and just a different style in so many ways. And he's really been proud of this project and comes here a lot to oversee it. So he's been a wonderful partner, and it's unfortunate that Syrah's this scores very, very well. Reasonably priced, our most reasonably priced wine, I think, and yet it's the lowest production that we do.
Yeah, so certainly the consumer demand for Syrah isn't as high as many of us would like to see.
Exactly, and it'll probably come back, just as we're now seeing Merlot come back.
So we've talked a little bit about viticulture. Looking forward for the Washington wine industry, what do you see as kind of the critical next steps to developing the industry?
I've been pounding on this drum ever since I came here, and I'll still pound on it, which is I don't think we've yet done enough to build awareness of the region. I think we don't. I'll just be candid. I think we misspend our money by not trying, to be going to Europe and going to Asia and taking our wines to events over there, rather than be taking them to regional cities and particularly influencing wine writers in the wine media. I think we should put much, much more time. We should charter jets and bring them here. We should take them. It's a free industry. The writers need us. They need news stories almost as much as we need them. And as I say, I think that's what we have to do. If we don't, I think it's going to happen. There's no doubt. I'd like to see it happen in my lifetime, and I don't think it will. I'm 74 years old. If we don't become more aggressive in telling a story, it should, not surprise people on the streets of Chicago that Washington's making great wines.
Yeah, it takes a long time to get that kind of awareness.
The other things are going to happen that are going to be wonderful, and they're going to happen just because of progress. We're going to see these young, bright new winemakers making better and better wine as they experience. We're going to learn the viticulture practices are going to get better and better. I just was shown a new site that could be one of the best sites in the state. That nobody even. It's a 4,000-acre site that I think will be all planted to grapes, and there's already water for it, which is the most critical factor. So I think it's all up for us, and we'll see more and more California people come up here. It's a very, very exciting future for Washington.
Future is very, very.
It's just as I think it's a very exciting future for America in general. We're still not a wine-consuming nation. We still don't drink per capita much more than we did in 1970. It's just that we drank different. The wines of the 70s, the Boom Farms and the Ripples and the Spagnatas and the Lambruscas and all of those bulk wines and things have disappeared. Wine coolers and things have disappeared, and everybody has moved upscale. So that now the cork finish wine, which in the 70s was like 5% of the consumption, is now maybe, if we consider screw cap on cork quality wines, it's probably 50% of the consumption. So that's grown, and the dollars have grown, and the awareness has grown, but total consumption. So we're drinking 3 gallons per capita. No wine country in the world drinks less than 10. If we went to 6, we would have to double the amount of vineyards and production in this country. So that's very exciting. And wine is not a fad. Once people discover it, wine is like great literature or poetry. Once you touch it, you don't give it up. You don't go to another drink. I mean, it's because of what it does for food. It makes food and the dining pleasure so special.
Well, Alan Shoup, Long Shadows Vintners, thank you so much for being here with us today. Pleasure talking with you.
Oh, indeed. It was my enjoyment. Thank you. Cheers.
Wine Enthusiast Catalog is the ultimate destination for all your wine storage and wine accessory needs. From luxury wine cabinets to the finest stemware, we've got you covered. Visit us at wineenthusiast.com to browse the latest trends in wine gadgets and wine decor. That's Wine Enthusiast Catalog at wineenthusiast.com, where we've got everything but the wine.
This podcast is produced by Large Media, L-A-R-J Media. Wine Enthusiast is made possible by grapes, sunshine, and wine, and by the hard-working editors who bring you news and information on your favorite beverage every day. If you like what we're doing, share our podcast with your friends and give us a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. For more fun wine information, follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Wine Enthusiast.